Man rescues drowning bobcat cub, then herd does something unexpected. It was a typical fall morning in the Colorado wilderness when David, a seasoned wildlife photographer, decided to take a walk through the thick forest near his cabin. The sound of the leaves rustling under his boots and the distant calls of birds were familiar comforts. What he didn't expect to encounter was a frantic cry coming from the nearby creek. The noise, desperate and weak, sent a chill down his spine. He quickened, his pace toward the water's edge, heart pounding. As he rounded a bend in the creek, the sight before him stopped him in his tracks. A baby bobcat, struggling to stay afloat in the rushing waters, its small body barely visible above the surface. Without hesitation, David plunged into the freezing creek, wading through the powerful current toward the helpless creature. With each step, the water grew colder and the current stronger, but his determination pushed him forward. Finally, he reached the bobcat, lifting the small animal from the water with surprising care for such a wild creature. The baby bobcat, its fur matted and soaked, let out a soft, pitiful whimper, and David's heart melted. He carried the animal to dry land, wrapping it gently in his jacket, feeling its rapid heartbeat against his chest. "You're safe now," David murmured, more to himself than to the trembling creature. The bobcat's golden eyes locked with his for a moment, and it was as though it understood that it had been saved, its frantic energy giving way to exhaustion. David rushed back to his cabin, making sure the bobcat was warm and comfortable. His mind raced with questions. How had the animal ended up in the creek? Why was it alone? He had saved many animals over the years, but there was something different about this one. As he sat next to the fire, watching the bobcat slowly recover, David couldn't shake the feeling that this moment, this encounter, was meant to be. But there was more to come, and the adventure had only just begun. The next few days passed in a blur as David cared for the baby bobcat, who he named Blaze, for its fiery orange fur. Blaze was surprisingly docile for an animal so young, and David quickly noticed how the bobcat would follow him around, nuzzling into his legs whenever he stopped moving. It was an odd yet endearing connection that David couldn't explain. As the days turned into weeks, the bond between David and Blaze deepened. The bobcat's wild instincts had not dulled, but there was a trust there, something in its eyes that told David that Blaze had accepted him as part of its world. He set up a small enclosure in his yard, letting Blaze roam free during the day, but always keeping an eye on the little creature to make sure it stayed safe. One evening, David stepped outside to find Blaze staring into the forest, its eyes wide and alert. It was acting as though something had caught its attention. David's gaze followed the bobcats and froze when he saw a group of adult bobcats standing at the edge of the clearing, watching them. David's heart raced. He recognized the creatures, wild bobcats, the same species as Blaze. They were bigger, older, and their eyes gleamed with caution. But it was the expression on Blaze's face that caught him off guard. It wasn't fear, but a silent understanding. The bobcat was home, and its family had arrived. David stepped back, not wanting to intrude on the moment. He stood still as the adult bobcats remained in the shadows, their eyes fixed on Blaze. It was clear that they were waiting for the right moment to approach, but David felt a sense of awe, realizing that Blaze had been accepted back into its own kind. The scene was peaceful, yet filled with tension. David knew he couldn't stay and watch forever. With a heavy heart, he retreated back into the cabin, watching the bobcats in the distance. But he couldn't shake the thought. What would they do next? Over the next few weeks, the adult bobcats kept their distance, watching from the woods but never approaching too closely. David tried to return to his normal routine, but he couldn't help but feel that the situation was building toward something he couldn't predict. One afternoon, as David worked on a new project, he heard a commotion coming from the yard. He rushed. Outside, his pulse quickening. Blaze was growling, the sound deep and low. As it stood between the adults and the yard, David's heart dropped into his stomach as he saw one of the larger bobcats advance toward Blaze, its eyes narrowed in a threatening gaze. Before David could react, a struggle broke out. Blaze, though smaller, fought with surprising ferocity, its claws flashing as it defended its territory. The adult bobcat hissed and lunged, its teeth bared, but Blaze was quick, ducking beneath its opponent and swiping at its legs. The sound of claws against flesh echoed through the air as David sprinted forward, trying to separate the animals. But something unexpected happened. Just as David reached them, the other adult bobcats in the group charged forward, not to attack Blaze, but to pull the larger bobcat away. They circled around it, growling fiercely, as if protecting Blaze from its aggression. The adult bobcats, usually solitary and territorial, had united to defend the younger one. David stood frozen, his mouth agape in shock. "They're protecting him," he thought, his mind struggling to comprehend what he was witnessing. The family of wild bobcats had come together to defend Blaze, showing a side of themselves that David had never expected. The tension in the air was palpable, but just as quickly as it had started, the bobcats began to retreat, slowly disappearing, back into the woods. Blaze stood panting, its golden eyes still locked on the retreating group. David exhaled in relief, unsure of what to make of the scene he had just witnessed. The next day, David took Blaze to the forest's edge, where the adult bobcats had disappeared. Blaze was no longer just a baby bobcat to David. It was a creature of the wild, its instincts honed by generations of survival. As they walked deeper into the forest, Blaze began to stop, sniffing the air, its ears twitching as if sensing something beyond David's perception. David, feeling a sense of unease, followed Blaze into the dense underbrush, the sounds of the forest growing louder around him. Suddenly, Blaze stopped in its tracks, looking up into the trees. David froze as well, his instincts telling him something was wrong. Then, a figure emerged from the shadows. Another bobcat, older and larger than any of the others. It was a mother, her fur thick and her eyes filled with both recognition and caution. The moment she saw Blaze, she let out a low, mournful call, and Blaze responded, stepping forward with a soft chirp. David's heart clenched as he realized that Blaze was not just part of this family. It was their leader, their protector. The bobcats had not just come to protect Blaze, they had come to reclaim their own, to bring it back into the fold. Blaze turned to David, giving him one last look before it moved into the trees, disappearing. With its family, David watched, a bittersweet feeling washing over him. He had saved Blaze, but now it was time for Blaze to return to its own kind. Years passed, and David never saw Blaze again, but the memory of that day remained with him. He often wandered into the woods, hoping for a glimpse of the bobcats, but he never did. He had done his part, and now the wild had reclaimed its own. One crisp autumn evening, as David sat on the porch of his cabin, he felt the familiar weight of something at his feet. He looked down and saw a familiar set of golden eyes staring up at him. Blaze had returned, older and wiser, but still the same in many ways. This time, Blaze didn't need to be rescued. It was a guardian in its own right, and as David reached down to scratch its head, he knew that the bond they had shared, however brief, would remain forever, unchanged, unbroken, and always protected by the wild.